Well, time for the political panel. Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal President, Steve Conroy, former Labor Senator and Cabinet Minister. Michael Kroger, the Prime Minister today accusing the supermarkets of helping to cause high inflation with their allegedly phony scheme of claiming to sell hundreds of items, about 1% of their stock, on special when they weren't. Fair enough?
Well, he's right to call it out, and the ACCC are right to call it out. The old trick of, $3.50 to $5.50 back to $4.50 and claiming it's a big discount is, a well-worn retail tactic. But is the price of Oreos adding hugely to inflation? Probably not. If there are hundreds of these items, then that might make a very small difference. But compared to the tens of billions of extra dollars the government is spending in the next 3 years, no, it's not a huge amount, Andrew, and it's not adding anything to near the inflation increase that the government is at a federal level.
I think what it's making the mistake of saying here is, what would the price of the Oreos have been naturally without any cheating about, their discount or whatever? They probably were going to go up anyway to $4.50. They briefly made it $5 so they could claim it was still low when in fact they'd hiked the price. That's not to say that had they not done that, the Oreos would be cheaper. I don't think that's true.
They wouldn't have gone up.
Steve Conroy, they wouldn't have, they would have gone up maybe to $4.50. They wouldn't have gone up temporarily to $5 so that they could be claimed as a discount at $4.50. But Steve Conroy, I mean, there was an edge of desperation, I thought, to the Prime Minister's claim that this is what's causing inflation. I'm not sure that's true at all, really.
Well, I don't know. We watched the same press conference, Andrew. I think the Prime Minister was asked a question about ACCC action on this matter, and he said if that was proven to be true, if that was proven to be true, then they had a case to answer. But by definition, if it's a court process and it's proved to be true, they do have a case to answer. So I'm not sure there was a desperation issue there at all. I think if you would look at any of the polls that came out in the last 24 hours, you would certainly say the government is under enormous pressure. It would be disappointed with the polls, but equally, as he's also made the point, they're still 50-50. And as we've discussed, and the issue around normally by now you'd be writing off this government if those polls were reflecting what's actually happening in the individual seats. And because the individual seats are very different to a nationalised poll like a 50-50, there still continues to be a most likely outcome if an election was held this weekend would be a minority Labor government. I know Michael will say, oh, well, we're on 70, but there's a very specific statement by one of the pollsters saying, we just want to be clear, there is still no chance of Peter Dutton forming a minority government in this set of circumstances that this poll shows. So I think the Prime Minister will be disappointed by where we're at the moment.
Steve raises a point there.
Lots of points.
I think the government's lurching from crisis to crisis and has lost control of the narrative, showing great incompetence. It's extraordinary to me that the opposition isn't ahead. It is ahead in some polls, but not a news poll. Why do you think that is?
So here's what's happening. On the Labor side, their polls are dropping every single day as people work out this is a hard left woke government, and it's a prisoner of the hard left in Australian politics, and there's a dozen more examples of where they've just caved in to the extreme left. But on the side of the coalition, Dutton's had two very big ideas. First of all, opposing the Voice, which was a courageous thing to do, given that it was only 40% with him when he announced that. He was proved absolutely right, and the vast majority of Australians agreed with him and have given him great credit for his courage. The second big idea is nuclear, which over time will be a vote winner. But Peter's polls have stagnated, in my view, in the last month or so. He needs a third big idea to carry him to majority government, which is possible with a third big idea. I gave him a third big idea, but I'm not sure he likes it. I won't go into that. But so Peter Dutton and the opposition federally have done an outstanding job But he needs another idea, and it's got to be an idea around the tax system, because it's a cost. This is a cost of living election. He's hit 2 big home runs on the voice and nuclear. He needs a third. He needs a third to carry him over the line.
Michael, unless you actually tell us what your idea was, you won't be able to claim credit afterwards, right?
I can tell you what it is, and I've lobbied the feds on it, which is basically that, and I've said this before on Sky, the average working member of the middle class, the working families, think the tax system works against them, right? They all think that, and they're right, because too many of these big companies, and many of the members of the BCA, by the way, have operations in tax havens. And they minimise and avoid tax in a lot of jurisdictions by the use of tax havens. So Dutton should say, no government contracts will be given to corporations who utilise tax havens in an unexplained way. If there's a reason why they've got an office in the Bahamas, fine. But if you've got unexplained operations in a tax haven, you will not be receiving any federal government contracts.
Say no more, because
that's not the way we're going to roll federally.
Notes. Anthony Albanese will be taking notes. He'll be in with that policy before you know. But I tell you what, Steve Conroy, the Nationals came up with what they think is. The Nationals came up today with what they think is yesterday with an even better idea: cheaper beer. They think the Nationals leader is suggesting, how about losing the excise? Lowering the excise on beer, although I must say Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume didn't sound that impressive. Listen.
Cost of living crisis that has meant that Australians aren't turning up to the pubs. They don't have the disposable income they used to.
What I can say is that when we were in government, we concentrated on this pretty hard. We made sure that there was support for distillers, but it is a very complicated tax to manage, that dealing with both wine and beer and spirits. We want to make sure it's a comprehensive approach.
A cut in beer excise, Stephen Conroy. Is that something?
Well, let me translate Jane's statement there. That's a hard no. But let's not forget that John Howard, to save his political skin, cut petrol excise. Disastrous for the state of the finances, but politically a genius stroke. Remember the Aston by-election? He cut the petrol indexation, or froze it, and it helped them win Aston and go on to win that election. So this is a populist idea that sometimes does get taken up. I think David's appearing on Paul Murray's show a bit too often. He's picking up Paul's suggestions like Paul keeps arguing for freeze all these excises, freeze them all, petrol, cigars, cigarettes, are all being ripped off. I think David's spending a bit too much time on Paul's show because unfortunately the opposition, the then government ignored all of those.
I
must say though that the excise
in this country.
Well, the excise is very, very high on things like gin and whiskey and all that. And I think we're actually stifling a domestic industry as a consequence. But I wouldn't say this is a major election winner. Michael Kroger, Stephen Conroy, thank you both for your time.